Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, aunts and uncles and cousins, of course, and mamas and pawpaws, or if you prefer, grandmothers and grandfathers, welcome to this edition of the Valley Baseball League podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Graham Knight, and I'm wearing our fine sponsor. It's bad hair day here, but I'm wearing our fine sponsor, the 47 brand hat. On the front, it says Valley Baseball League, and on the back, it says Gateway to the Majors. And that is true. But like the roads to Rome, which road is where exactly is the gateway to the majors? Is it coming from a D1 school where you got recognized since you were in the crib? Or like Mike Garza, we were joking with him in an earlier podcast. Please go back and watch it. He has a little 1-year-old, and I'm like, hey, Mike, when you look in the crib, can you tell, is he a 3/4 sidearm or what's his deal? And he's like, well, the kid likes music more than he likes baseball. But, hey, that's going to give him rhythm at the plate, right? So do all roads lead to Rome, or is there something magic that happens when these, somebody other than a D1 player comes to the Valley League and plays? Traditionally, we've had a split of about 50% D1 players, but I have heard unsubstantiated rumors from teams in this league that they'll only recruit players from D1 school. Yet we've seen some magic happen when D3 players have come. Charlottesville, for example, had 5 D3 players come in the 2017 season. They kind of all rallied together. And Michael Wielansky says it best.
So the Valley League for me was huge. I would say that's probably the biggest reason that I was drafted. I got to play with a lot of big D1 talent, and I played well. I actually got to go to 2 showcases when I was there, which put me in front of some pro scouts.
Again, back to the gateway. Is the best gateway to the majors to go through that D1 avenue and head on out into, the spotlight? To me, one of the most endearing things I've enjoyed making these podcasts is when John Leonard lights up about a D3 story where a D3 player came in, may not have been getting any love by the scouts, got noticed here and went on to greatness. The best example of that we've been able to capture so far is Michael Wielansky. Encourage you to go back and listen to that podcast. Really a pleasure interviewing him. We got a chance to talk to him about playing in the Valley and then being drafted the next year by the Houston Astros. He's on his way. He's on the conveyor belt to greatness. And he's worked hard for it. He came into the league, said he was kind of hoping to hit 200, 300 something, and boy, did he blow it up while he was here, and got noticed. So he's the best example, kind of came from a different avenue, found another gateway. So I wanted to share that one of the highlights for me is being able to find these D3 stories that light John Leonard up. But one thing that's even better for me is you got to remember, I'm a hockey player. I spent decades hating baseball. And then I found the Valley Baseball League, and it changed my life forever. But one of the other really highlights for me in these podcasts is being able to take hockey and draw an analogy between hockey and baseball. So let me connect the 1980 Miracle on Ice team with the Valley Baseball League. When I'm not doing podcasts for the Valley Baseball League, I'm the show director for GameTime with Boomer Esiason, and thanks to the executive producer of that show, I want to share with you a clip from a recent show we did with Boomer Esiason on the Miracle on Ice team. Here, give a listen to this, and we'll talk more about it in just a second.
I would imagine on your team, Jim, what was it like before the game started in the locker room for you, the starting goalie, knowing that you're playing against this Red Army team that you saw a few weeks earlier, right before the Olympics started, and didn't go so well at MSG?
You prepare for a lifetime for this type of opportunity, right? And so really great players look forward to that opportunity. So to me, it was a chance to go out there and do something special. And I had prepared differently, as I like to say, is one period against the Russians was like playing a whole game against a different team. So, the concentration level was different. How I focused on that game was different. But Herb, when he came in, and Craig, our coaching staff, were just so comfortable that we had prepared so hard for this game that we were ready. And at the end of the game in Madison Square Garden, I think our players kind of got in rhythm, and we were ready. And the crowd, the USA chants, and the greatest thing about that is when you hear that chant USA, USA, it started in Lake Placid. It came from people's hearts, and it really was the sixth man for us. It really, really helped us. So it, as you know, as an athlete, when you get that opportunity to be on that world stage and compete, it isn't nerve-wracking. It's really fun.
That clip is from a show we made with Boomer Esiason featuring Jim Craig, the goalie for the U.S. Hockey team, and assistant coach Craig Patrick. Just a small kind of brush with greatness. I grew up playing hockey in Denver, and the guy who taught me how to play hockey was a guy named Jim Wisty. Jim played in the World Hockey Association, and when we were making that show, I found out that Craig Patrick had a connection to Denver University, and turns out he knew Jim Wisty. So it was really fun for me to actually have a 6-degree separation with greatness. Don't get the wrong idea. I was never like the great hockey player. But anyway, I loved hockey, and now, as you know, I love baseball. But my point in all of this is to talk about how, players rise up to that occasion. We did a podcast with Rick Spires, who came in and did amazing, both ends of the bat. Went 4-0 from the mound and then hit well over 300, and just had an amazing season here. Michael Wielansky, similar story. So part of me wonders if one of the gateways is to bring a player and put them on a big stage and give them the chance and see what they do. In a recent podcast with Sam Perlazzo, Sam talked about if you want to see what a player can do, you put them into a bigger game. So I showed you that clip from GameTime with Boomer Esiason to kind of set the stage for the conversation that's going to take place between Erin, Austin Gisriel, John Leonard, and Joe Harmon. I asked Erin to ask the team what they thought the best gateway was. Was there only one? Is it D1 it, or is there more to it? Here's a conversation Erin had with John, Austin, and Joe.
Everybody likes a good underdog story. We saw that with Charlottesville in 2019 when they had a ton of D3 talent that took them to the championship. I'm going to ask you three here, if you were the GM of a team, you were putting together a roster, would you rather have D1 players or D3, and why? And we'll start with Austin.
That's a very good question, and I think it really depends on the mix, because there are D1 schools like Florida and Clemson, and then there are D1 schools like Joe's alma mater of Towson State, and they're all D1, but they're not in the same league, literally and figuratively. So it depends on the D1 player that you get. I'm not. And John maybe could speak to this better than I can, but a D3 player, say at Shenandoah University, I wonder if he has any real less talent than most of the roster at Towson State, for example, or similar D1 schools. So when you're talking about that lower half of the D1 schools, are they that much different in talent from the upper echelon, the top 10% of the D3 and D2 schools? So I do think there is something to the idea of team chemistry. I'm not one of these, sabermetric guys that says, oh, it's all in the numbers. Well, no, it's not. They're human beings, and you've got to manage human beings, and they've got to get along with one another, or it's going to detract from their play on the field. So there's a lot to that. And if you do, recruit the sort of the underdog player, you want this group of scrappers. I mean, that's certainly a legitimate recruiting philosophy, and you're going to take those guys that didn't quite make D1 or what have you, especially Florida schools or D2, D3, junior college. They don't want to go far from home for their schooling, but maybe if they lived in, Maryland instead of Florida, they would be playing at a D1 school. So that's sort of a long answer to your question, but I think it really depends on your recruiting philosophy.
Joe, he threw your school under the bus there with Towson a little bit.
Yeah.
No,
well,
he's not going to be blinded by the D1, title for a school.
right.
How do you feel about it?
Well, the question you started us off with, Erin, if I were on a presidential debate stage, I would say I reject the premise of your question. I don't think that it comes down to I'm only going to look at D1 players, or I'm not going to look at D1 players. That's like Bill Belichick, when Drew Bledsoe was injured, say, I can't put Tom Brady in as a starting quarterback because he wasn't drafted high enough. It's, if any major league scouting organization puts that parameters around itself, then it's selling itself short. It's being breaking it. It's doing a terrible job. You should be fired for that kind of a concept. You got to go find the talent where the talent is. And John, since the day we first started talking about the all-decade team, we still need to get a scout on this show to dig into how the scouts look at players and what they see as something there or something not there. And so when we have guys on your all-decade team who hit over 400 in over a 42-game season and don't get drafted in a 40-round draft, why? So what is it that the scouts are looking for when they see these players? And they got to find that in D2 and in D3 and in the JUCO teams as well. There's more there to just where this kid goes to school.
John, you want to pick up off of that? Say, how many D3s in the Valley made the, all Valley League, all decade Valley League team? Do you have any stats that you can back up whether you should go D3 versus D1 or anywhere in between?
Well, I think there is probably a wider chasm of talent between D3 and D1, maybe, in my experience anyway. With that said, there have been many players in the Valley League that have been very important contributors that have come out of D3. Most of these guys don't get drafted, but right now there are 6 guys that are still active or just recently active in minor league baseball that came out of D3 and played in the Valley. From Eric Kratz, who played back in the early 2000s with Waynesboro and Harrisonburg, all the way to Michael Wielansky, who played in Charlottesville in 2017. But when I went back and looked through my lists of the top performers, the best hitters and starting pitchers and relief pitchers, almost every year there was somebody out of D3 that made one of those lists. It wasn't every year, but almost every year somebody stepped up and had a wonderful summer. And we were talking about the all-decade team. Michael Wielansky was first team at second base, and then Connor Miller, who pitched in Woodstock in 2019, was first team at reliever, and he came from Division III York in Pennsylvania. So I think it really does need to be a mix. I know that the recruiters in the league, they work really hard to make sure that they're getting a kid that's going to work hard and, make sure that you don't get the D1 guy that big times his teammates, and make sure that you don't make sure that everybody hopefully will fit together as best as possible. A few years ago, this team isn't in the league anymore, but there was a recruiter, a general manager of one of the Valley League teams, who said to me that his dream was to go out and fill his squad with the best D3 players and only D3 players from all over the country. So try to bring in the best, all the guys that were all region and all American, and see if they could compete. When I mentioned that to somebody else in the league, they just laughed and said, no, it wouldn't work well that way. So even if you say I'm only going to have D1 guys or only have D3 guys, I think going either way is probably a mistake. Most likely a mistake.
Sure. It's how much can you rely on that emotional, the mental mind game of it, saying we can outperform and we can beat these guys, show them that we're just as good. I remember talking to Rick Spires, who was on that Charlottesville team in 2017 as a D3 player. He said that it gave him a lot of confidence being able to compete against other players from higher levels of baseball throughout the summer. And then he was able to go with his college team to the championship game, for their division. So it's obviously a great opportunity for any player, and maybe more so for a player that's not as recognizable, for them to gain some recognition throughout the summer. Do you guys, anybody have any last tidbits that they want to throw out their thoughts on the matter?
Well, let me share a quick story. about a big-time D1 player that Newmarket had about a dozen years back. He was a football and baseball standout at the University of Florida. And his name was Riley Cooper, who went on to have a several-year pro career with Philadelphia Eagles as a wide receiver, also happened to be Tim Tebow's roommate. And I believe it was either, John, you might remember this, I want to say it was the Phillies who had offered him $1 million to sign, as a baseball player, which he turned down to return to Florida to play football. And, his year in Newmarket, he wanted to come back the next year, and the staff basically was like, we don't need this head case on our squad. Big time talent, but just as you said, it's what made me think of the story. He tried to big time his teammates, and it just didn't work well. So they actually had a high profile D1 guy they could have brought back and declined to do that. So talent wins, but that mix of who you have in the clubhouse is also important.
Cooper ended up, I think, that next year when Newmarket said no, he went up to Northern Virginia and played for Haymarket.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think he lasted the whole season, though, either.
He did not, no.
Yeah.
It's interesting to point out a difference when you see it the other way, when you might not want somebody of that caliber of talent because they don't mesh well with the team. I think that you see a lot of the D3, D2 players coming in and being more willing to be a part of the team and work with each other to be successful overall, because they might not be such an individual, stats player. They're not over there just trying to kind of inflate their stat line from day to day.
Right. And let me share a quick thought that I'll paraphrase what Buck Showalter once said while he was looking at Barry Bonds take batting practice. He said, every team can afford one jackass, but he better be really, really good.
There we go. We might have to make sure that this gets played, after 10 o'clock, in case people are coming out from the FCC to flag us for language over there.
But
I cleaned that one up as it is.
Another player, though, like I love these D3 guys that come in and do well, and even if they're not the best player in the world, but they're just a good teammate. Bailey Hall goes to Eastern Mennonite, and he played in Stanton in 2018 and 19, and he just won Eastern Mennonite's President's Award, which they give to the top male athlete in the entire school. And it's just because it was just a tribute to Bailey and the type of person that he is and the kind of teammate that he is. And that kind of stuff is just great. They come to the Valley League, they have a good experience, and they carry that over to their college. Like you said, it did with Rick. It also did with Bailey. And then if some of these guys can get drafted and go pro, that's just icing on the cake.
Absolutely. Joe, do you have any stories that you would like to add?
I don't have any stories, but I think what it comes down to is talent is talent. And, guys, players in every sport, and as humans, we come into our own at different stages, where, a player might be awesome at 16, 17 years old and go to LSU or Georgia Tech, whereas someone else might go to Potomac State and Kaiser, West Virginia, and then on to, Appalachian State, and then find himself at 21 years old. And just come out of nowhere and be fantastic. So talent is talent, and the baseball gods are going to find it wherever it is.
I appreciate the comments from everybody where no one's picking an all D3, all D2, or all D1 team out of this panel. So we have that out of the way. They'll be looking through the stat lines to pick their teams if they ever get the opportunity. Graham, I am going to throw it back to you. Really enjoyed talking to you guys.
Thanks, Erin.
Thanks, Erin.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I personally love the Riley Cooper story. I love it because I think it's great that the Valley Baseball League can say that over 1,100 players have come out of this league and gone on to play in the majors. And I think it's great that they can say that one of our players came out of this league and went on to play in the NFL. Personally, I think that's great. Anyway, before we wrap up this conversation, which is better, D1, D2, D3? Talent, no talent, doesn't matter. As Joe says, talent's going to get discovered wherever talent is. Let me play one last clip from Game Time with Boomer Esiason. Here, give a listen. This is how they picked the team for the 1980 U.S. Olympic champions.
The outstanding 2004 TV movie Miracle featured a telling scene in which Craig Patrick, played by Noah Emmerich, says to Herb Brooks, played by Kurt Russell, "This is the final roster? You're missing some of the best players." To which Brooks responds, "I'm not looking for the best players, Craig. I'm looking for the right ones." So, Craig, how accurate was the movie and that little exchange between you and Coach Brooks?
That statement was correct.
When you looked at that roster and you saw those players and you knew the mindset that Herb Brooks was going to bring to this team, did you think it was going to be as explosive as it seemed to be?
Well, I have to say I was away from amateur hockey for 10 years playing pro.
Right.
And got involved with the 80 team. And at that camp in August, the National Sports Festival, there was like 210 players there. I was amazed at the talent level that was there. And as Herb said, he didn't pick the best players out of that camp. He picked the ones he wanted from.
What was he looking for in a player, in your eyes?
I think someone that could put up with what he was going to be doing to them. he put them through their paces for 7 months. And at the end of the day, that group of guys, the 20 guys that made it to Lake Placid, were the best conditioned athletes in the planet that year. He trained them that hard, and they responded that well.
Yeah, so it wasn't the most talented players, it was the right players. And also players who were willing to work awful hard. Best conditioned athletes on the planet? Man, those guys worked hard for 7 months. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and the analogy between the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team and the Valley Baseball League. You know, it's been great to see players like Rick and Michael and Mike Garza come into this league and excel. And we're looking for many more stories like that. It's also great to hear from Sam Perlazzo and talk about what it means to take a player and put them in a bigger game, and to be able to put a bow on that with the conversation that took place in New York just a few months ago. By the way, if you're interested in seeing Game Time with Boomer Esiason, you can find it in pretty much any market. It's in 210 markets around the country. It's in Harrisonburg on WHSV. It will be in Charlottesville if it's not already on WVIR. You can find it in Washington, D.C. on WUSA and pretty much any CBS affiliate or across the country. If you want to know where to find it, please send me an email, vbleague@isomermedia.com. That's vbleague@isomermedia.com. That's going to wrap it up for us for tonight. For Erin, for Joe, for John, and for Austin, and for the league and the teams in this league, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. We've got many more to come, and we're going to some baseball coming at you as well. It's our 2020 season. Hindsight's 2020, right? So that's why we're calling it the 2020 season. We're going to look back at the 2019 season in a way we couldn't have seen it the first time. All that starts in just a few days, so be tuning in every night, same time, same YouTube channel. Thanks again for watching, everybody. We'll see you again tomorrow night.